And now joining me here, Tom Burnett, the commissioner of the Southland Conference, but for these purposes, the chair of the men's basketball selection committee. Tom, it's been quite a week, unbelievable games since I saw you in person earlier in the week here in Indianapolis. First, I just want to get your overall thought on the bracket itself. Now that you see it, it's like you're creating something out of nothing and you can hold it. What are your thoughts when you see the bracket?
Well, certainly having done this for 5 years and you come to the conclusion of the process, you're very gratified, feel very good about what our committee's done, certainly over the past few days and throughout the year, obviously. So don't have any reservations as it relates to the experience. It's been great. It's been positive. And certainly it was challenging. Certainly we had a lot of things going on here up until today when we released the bracket. We were very busy observing games, having a lot of back and forth. We had about 10 contingencies earlier in the day, and of course whittled those down to a couple, and then of course the final bracket that everyone saw. So it's been hectic, it's been busy, it's really been nonstop since earlier this week.
All right, so let's deal with the contingency. Obviously the biggest one was the Atlantic 10. Richmond Davidson came down to the wire. So what were the contingencies? Richmond wins, what did that mean? Had Richmond lost, what did that mean?
Well, certainly in the end, Richmond had to play their way in. This was how Richmond could get into the tournament. And of course, they did win and beat Davidson. Certainly, Dayton was that next team out, as we've seen, the first team out. So, certainly Dayton being out is a result of Richmond winning the A10 tournament.
Help me out beyond Dayton. What was that list like beyond that?
Well, the next three out were SMU, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma in our deliberations, all very strongly in consideration. We're watching Texas A&M make a terrific run to the SEC tournament final, and that factored into a lot of our discussion all the way down to the very end when we came up with the final bracket. So Aggies did a great job down the stretch, that's for sure.
So to that point, I'd love to reiterate the bracketing principles here. Because Richmond won, they could not be an AQ in Dayton in the first four. What changes, if any, did you have to make in the first four because of Richmond winning, or was the Wyoming, Indiana, Rutgers, Notre Dame what you had even before that game between Richmond and Davidson?
Yeah, certainly I don't know that it was a Richmond issue as much as it was maybe there was a group of Big Ten teams that came in toward the end, and you certainly, you may have had a situation where teams would have played each other again in the first four. And as you well know, we try to keep conference teams separate from one another. Also, too, we had a situation, Indiana had played Notre Dame earlier this year. So that could have been a first four matchup as well. So not a lot of manipulation there at the end, but certainly, the committee has the ability to, flex a little bit and change some things up to ensure that we keep conference teams separate. Try not to have rematches from the regular season. So a little bit of complication as we were going through our contingencies. Some other results might have impacted that as well.
Yeah, so let me just deal with that. I mean, had A&M beaten Tennessee, what would that have done?
Well, I think what we would tell you is that Tennessee's win got Notre Dame into the bracket. Notre Dame was the last team into the bracket. So had A&M won, that would have bumped Notre Dame off the list as well. All
right, so that was the contingencies. Now just overall here in terms of just a couple of quick things I'm just curious of. 9 Big Ten teams, obviously not easy to separate as much as you could. How did you decide on the Indianapolis sub-region? Because we know there's so many teams that are close to Indy, and you could have gone in a number of different directions. You've got Kentucky and Tennessee. You easily could have, in some scenario, had Purdue. Maybe if Iowa was higher, it could have been them. But what was in the thought process of Indianapolis?
Well, as it relates to one specific site, and we'll take Indianapolis as the example here. You know, the bracketing process, once the seed line is set and we begin to bracket, that becomes somewhat automated, paying attention to those bracketing principles. So we don't really sit down and talk about, okay, what's the collection of teams we want to have in Indy or any other location. It really comes down certainly to mileage and proximity to a site, and ultimately, you know, the seated positions that fit the Indianapolis first and second round site. So nothing really deliberate by the committee. We kind of let the process take over in somewhat of an automated fashion, as all of us kind of monitor that process here on Selection Sunday.
You know, one team in your first four that you talked about was Indiana. And we talk so much about each game meaning something, regardless if it's in the conference tournament or any time of the year. And Indiana beat Michigan. And then, they get to the semifinal. Those wins individually, whether they happened in March or they happened in November, are good wins. But how did Indiana, as a good example, sort of progress throughout the course of the week as they're playing good teams and winning?
Well, they had the attention of the committee, that's for sure, as we're watching, another great tournament run by Indiana. But, we've been tracking on the Hoosiers all year long. So it wasn't as if we just discovered Indiana this week. And, I think in the end, they kind of came in late. There was kind of a group of Big Ten teams, Michigan, Rutgers, Indiana, that were kind of collected toward the end of the teams we were bringing in. And, certainly had to sort them out through the scrubbing process, and we landed where we did.
All right, last two things for you, and I appreciate your time. First off, how close was it between Gonzaga and Arizona for the number one overall seed?
I think we had referenced that back at the bracket reveal a few weeks ago, and I would say that both teams have continued to do very well. It was close. I don't know that the committee was in a different place other than Gonzaga being a clear number one overall seed, but Arizona a very strong number two. And certainly you had the two Big 12 teams right after that. So I would say both were very solid in their positions.
And the last one that sort of jumped out, and I'm just curious about Tennessee. They win the SEC. I'm just curious how close they were to getting to the 2 line as a 3.
Well, I think very close in the deliberation. I think also too, we can't look at Tennessee by themselves. We've got to consider the other teams on the seed line that are next to them. As you'll see, Wisconsin is just ahead of them. And, I think the committee, like Tennessee, thought very well of Wisconsin as well in honoring their record this year and their performance. And, you can't just pick Tennessee up off of one line and move them, over to another one. You've got to scrub up against the teams next to you. And I think the committee felt that Wisconsin, scrubbed a little bit better than Tennessee at this moment in time. But, that's all part of the great argument ahead, who's going to do well and who's going to play their best.
Tom, I appreciate it. I love all this stuff. And we got a great month ahead. Wonderful job. Take a breath. You're not playing tomorrow, so that's good. But just relax at least for a day or two before we go into the grind. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.